Divorce is a brutal process for most people who have to go through it. There is a lot of emotion, there is a lot of logistics, there is a lot of cost. One thing as a part of that journey that may not be front and center is the importance of navigating insurance. And there's a lot of elements to consider here, but in the complexity of extracting yourself from a marriage, some of that can get lost. So we're going to talk about that today, things you should think about and watch out for. Our guest is Farzana Damji. She is Senior Director at RBC Insurance. She joins us today from Mississauga, Ontario. Hello there.
Hi, Bruce.
I run a cheerful podcast. I'm a delightful person, and we're going to talk about divorce. So just
Yeah.
contextually, I know that that word can be a real trigger for people. It can be very, very difficult. And I'm even going to make it one worse and begin with some worst case scenarios around insurance. And I'm going to ask you for some horror stories off the top, because I think the why of ensuring that things are sorted out properly on insurance is really, really important. So when you think about things that can go wrong when it comes to divorcing couples and how they manage those insurance policies, what would be some examples?
So I think the biggest example would be people not understanding that, your insurance doesn't adjust automatically, right? So you're going through this huge life event and you still have to let your insurance company know that you may not want your ex-spouse to be beneficiary of your life insurance policy, right? So you may still want it, but you may not. So right off the bat, that's going to be a
Yeah.
horror story, especially
And
if you're in a new
if you don't
relationship,
make
right?
that change,
Yeah.
then in the event of your death, they get the proceeds.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the whole point of the beneficiary. So it's static. It's going to be whoever you have at the time of the death. So that's one critical step, right? To ensure that you update that
Mm.
beneficiary. I would say the other big thing is, sometimes during this high emotional time that you talked about, people are just canceling their insurance. They want to cut off any ties they may have with this person. They don't want any connection. So they cancel their insurance before the entire divorce proceeding has finalized. And, there are instances where it may be court ordered to actually keep insurance in place. And
Mm.
once you've canceled that insurance, it's gone. And now you're reapplying. You may be unhealthy now, and you're likely going to pay more premiums because you're older,
Mm.
right? So that's another thing that you don't want to do.
Can you give us some context on how people should think about timing? And I ask because there are some people who, they have conflict, they choose to separate, they get divorced, and the sequence occurs within a relatively short timeline. For a lot of couples, there can be disharmony, there can be separation. They might not get divorced for years. When does this really need to be changed on documents so that it makes the most sense for the circumstance they're dealing with?
So I would say once all the proceedings are finalized, right? Like once you've actually gone through mediation or gone through any type of legal agreement, that's when you can decide what you actually want to do in terms of changing the beneficiary or canceling insurance, getting new insurance with your partner if you still need it, perhaps for a child. Um, but also, it's good to actually bring up that you have insurance to your attorney, right? If you're working with attorney, a lot of people don't even bring up the fact of insurance. They're going to bring up, all the joint assets they have together, but insurance should be one of the items that you speak about as well.
Mm.
It's not something to deal with at the end. It's actually something that you should bring up right away.
Where does the topic fit within a settlement conversation? And I ask because if you've got two humans and a significant disparity in income, the higher income person is likely going to be paying some sort of support to the other spouse, whether they have children or not. There could be some support. And if I'm the lower income spouse, I want to make sure that the higher income spouse has sufficient insurance to guarantee the continuation of that support. What sort of questions would I ask to ensure that that's codified in some sort of an agreement?
Well, that becomes your income stream now, right? Like as the lower earner, you want to make sure that your ex-spouse actually has insurance to cover them in case something happens, right? So you think about death as one, but you're bringing up like more like ongoing spousal payments that the larger earner is going to have to pay. So that actually gets into disability payments, right? So what's going to happen if your spouse, they don't pass away, but they can't work anymore? So
Right.
where is that income replacement coming from? So that's really something that you'd want to bring up with your attorney as well.
When I think about insurance, I immediately think life. We've now layered in disability. There could be critical illness.
Mhm.
What's the full spectrum? When we use the word insurance, what's the full spectrum of all the variables that we want to consider?
Yeah, so definitely life. I would say life is the first one you want to get, just to ensure that you can keep the lights on in case something happens to a family member, and that's to protect you if they pass away. But definitely the more less known ones are what we call living benefits. So it's benefits you're getting while you're still alive, but perhaps a disability has prevented you from working or even making the kind of money you are used to making. So disability insurance is super important. And then there's also critical illness. So critical illness provides you with a lump sum benefit if you get diagnosed with one of 30 illnesses. And some of those illnesses are very common ones, unfortunately, heart attack, stroke, cancer. So a lump sum amount that you can do anything with. And when we look at critical illness insurance, over 90% of Canadians don't have it. And same with the disability insurance, right? And life insurance is a little more well known. People know they have to have it, but we still have, 60% of Canadians are underinsured. So there's definitely a huge gap. And then divorce is now just adding on an additional layer of highlighting the need for insurance, really.
There are some categories of spending where it's significantly cheaper when you're buying for two people. A hotel
Yeah.
room. You buy a hotel room
Yes.
for the night, two people split the
Yeah.
cost, it's half price. Other
Yeah.
things, a seat on an airplane. You're buying two seats. There's no savings just because you're getting two. As
Right.
we think about insurance broadly, are there economies when a couple buys a term life insurance, and therefore does it cost more if I'm now reapplying as a solo person?
So yeah, if there's definitely economies of scale when we get into term insurance. If you purchase a joint insurance policy, we have policies like first to die. So you purchase the insurance, you're paying based on a blended age, which isn't as easy as just taking the two ages and dividing it in two. There is a blended age we'd assign, and based on that, the first person that passes away, it's covered on their life. So there are economies of scale that way. So with disability and CI, you're not going to see that as much, but definitely, you would want to look at your joint insurance policy if you split up and decide, would you rather purchase two single policies? There are some instances that you could split it up and have two single policies. And sometimes divorce is one of those conditions that they will allow you, the insurance company will allow you to split it up without penalizing you for that.
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. So, if we've had a joint policy and then we get divorced, does that lead to an automatic requirement that I change my policy, or are insurers generally willing to let that policy run its course, even though we're no longer married?
They would let it run still because there still is an insurable interest in you having a policy with that person, especially if you have children together, right? So, like we talked about, there could be a court order for you to keep insurance. So the insurance company wouldn't prevent that, wouldn't prevent the joint coverage. But you may, like, as the individual, you may not want to be connected to that person anymore because you may want to name a different beneficiary on your policy, right? So
Mm.
it starts to get a little bit messy there.
What are the other questions that a newly single person might ask as they think about their coverage? Because there is a real security blanket when you're with a spouse. One person loses their job, maybe the other has a job. One person is unwell, the other person is healthy. You're solo, and maybe there isn't a support agreement or the economics don't work for support.
Mm.
You're now single. What are the questions you should be asking?
Yeah, that's actually a great question because I think we all know those couples where there's an obvious person that it has a higher financial acumen and they usually take care of all of those things, which becomes very intimidating for the other spouse.
Yeah.
So the question you'd want to ask is if, if I become ill, I'm newly single, if I become ill, will I be able to afford my daily living expenses? Will I have to give up my quality of life if I all of a sudden get a disability? and I don't have, or I have reduced monthly income. Can I afford this without the person I don't have anyone else to rely on? Will I have to take my child out of their sports that they enjoy playing, or will I have to transfer them to a different school? Will I be able to, still maintain my financial obligations? So, like you said, there is no safety net anymore. You are not benefiting from economies of scale in terms of housing expenses or any types of expenses. So, your monthly expenses have gone up and you've lost your safety net. So, it's definitely highlighting that need, right?
Very interesting stuff. Farzana, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Let's hope every marriage ends with a happily ever after and continues on forever. But there are circumstances in which divorces do occur, and
Absolutely.
insurance is something you need to keep on top of as that process winds its way through. Farzana Damji is Senior Director at RBC Insurance.